Linear B is a syllabic script that was used for writing Mycenaean Greek, the earliest attested form of Greek. The script predates the Greek alphabet by several centuries. The oldest Mycenaean writing dates to about 1450 BC. It is descended from the older Linear, an undeciphered earlier script used for writing the Minoan language, as is the later Cypriot syllabary, which also recorded Greek. Linear B, found mainly in the Pylos archives at Knossos, Cydonia, Pylos, Thebes and Mycenae, disappeared with the fall of Mycenaean civilization during the Bronze Age collapse. The succeeding period, known as the Greek Dark Ages, provides no evidence of the use of writing. It is also the only one of the three linears to be deciphered, by young English architect and self-taught linguist, Michael Ventris. Linear B consists of around 87 syllabic signs and over 100 ideographic signs. These ideograms or signifying signs symbolize objects or commodities. They have no phonetic value and are never used as word signs in writing a sentence. The application of Linear B appears to have been confined to administrative contexts. In all the thousands of clay tablets, a relatively small number of different hands have been detected, 45 in Pylos and 66 in Knossos. From this fact, it could be thought that the script was used by only a guild of professional scribes who served the central palaces. Once the palaces were destroyed, the script disappeared. The script, Linear B, has roughly 200 signs, divided into syllabic signs with phonetic values and ideograms with semantic values. The representations and naming of these signs have been standardized by a series of international colloquia, starting with the first in Paris in 1956. After the third meeting in 1961 at the Wingspread Conference Center in Racine, Wisconsin, a standard proposed primarily by Emmett L. Bennett, Jr., became known as the Wingspread Convention, which was adopted by a new organization, the Comité Copyright International Permanent des Permeltudes Mic, or Copyright Means, affiliated in 1970 by the fifth colloquium with UNESCO. Colloquia continue, the 13th occurred in 2010 in Paris. Many of the signs are identical or similar to those in Linear A. However, Linear A encoded a still unknown language, and it is uncertain that similar signs had similar phonetic values. Syllabic signs, the grid developed during decipherment by Michael Ventris and John Chadwick of phonetic values for syllabic signs is shown below. Initial consonants are in the leftmost column. Vowels are in the top row beneath the title. The transcription of the syllable is listed next to the sign along with Bennett's identifying number for the sign preceded by an asterisk. In cases where the transcription of the sign remains in doubt, Bennett's number serves to identify the sign. The signs on the tablets and other ancient artifacts often show considerable variation from each other and from the representations below. Discovery of the reasons for the variation and possible semantic differences is a topic of ongoing debate in Mycenaean studies. Special and unknown signs, in addition to the grid, the first edition of documents contained a number of other signs termed homophones, because they appeared at that time to resemble the sounds of other syllables and were transcribed accordingly. Pa 2 and Pa 3 were presumed homophonous to Pa. Many of these were identified by the second edition and are shown in the special values below. The second edition relates, it may be taken as axiomatic that there are no true homophones. The unconfirmed identifications of 34 and 35 as I2 and I3 were removed. Pa 2 became QA. Other values remain unknown, mainly because of scarcity of evidence concerning them. Note that 34 and 35 are mirror images of each other, but whether this graphic relationship indicates a phonetic one remains unconfirmed. In recent times, CIPEM inherited the former authority of Bennett and the Wingspread Convention in deciding what signs are confirmed, and how to officially represent the various sign categories. In editions of Mycenaean texts, those signs whose value has not been confirmed by CIPEM are always transcribed as numbers preceded by an asterisk. CIPEM also allocates the numerical identifiers, and until such allocation, new signs are transcribed as a bullet point enclosed in square brackets, a eurocent. Spelling and pronunciation, the signs are approximations a euro each, may be used to represent a variety of about 70 distinct combinations of sounds, within rules and conventions. The grid presents a system of monosyllabic signs of the type VCV. Clarification of the 14 or so special values tested the limits of the grid model, but Chadwick in the end concluded that even with the ramifications, the syllabic signs can unexceptionally be considered monosyllabic. Possible exceptions, Chadwick goes on to explain, include the two diphthongs, th and th, as in th euro iku pi t jo, for aguptios and th euro, or kwag, for odwa s. However, a diphthong is by definition two vowels united into a single sound and therefore might be typed as just v. Thus th per mil, as in th per mil erio, for elini1, is of the type CV. Diphthongs are otherwise treated as two monosyllables, th euro, aru ra, for aurorans, of the types CV and V. Lengths of vowels and accents are not marked, tha, th florin, th and the more doubtful th and th may be regarded as beginning with labialized consonants, rather than two consonants, even though they may alternate with a two-sign form, oda-twita and oda-dawita for oda-twenta. A siwi-jo and a sweet-jo for usios. Similarly, th and th begin with palatalized consonants rather than two consonants, t-re-ja for trja. The one sign Chadwick tags as the exception to the monosyllabic rule is th, but this he attributes to a development ptepje as in klepte-klepje. Linear B does not consistently distinguish between voiced and unvoiced stops and between aspirated and unaspirated stops even when these distinctions are phonemic in Mycenaean Greek. For example, par-te is par-ta, par-c is fair-c. P on the other hand never represents I squared I plus or minus I florin I to the first I micron I is qac ru. Ko-ru is kiras, ka-rawi is grawis, ko-no is sklonos. Exceptionally, however, the dentals are represented by AT series and AD series for unvoiced and voiced, to-so for tosos but do-ra for da-ra. However, to-ra-k for the-ra-kes. In other cases aspiration can be marked but is optional, pu-te for futuar, but phute-re for futa-res. Initial aspiration may be marked only in the case of initial A and rarely, ha-te-ru for hortaron, and yet a ni-ja for ha-ni-li. The J series represents the semivowel equivalent to English Y, and is used word initially and as an intervocalic glide after a syllable ending in I, a-jo for I plus or minus aii. A te-me-te-jo for a 1/4 II micron I 1/4 II to the first II. The W series similarly are semivowels used word initially and intervocalically after a syllable ending in U, ku-wano for kuanos. The R series includes both the N phonemes, T-repo for tripos and Tereso for tulisos. The Q series is used for monosyllables beginning with a class of consonants that disappeared from Classical Greek by regular phonetic change, the labiovelars. These had entered the language from various sources, inheritance from Proto-Indo-European, assimilation, borrowing of foreign words, especially names. In Mycenaean they are, and rarely in names and a few words, apikoru for amphiquoli, koru for goukoli, koita for ioi 1/2 ii. Some consonants in some contexts are not written, word initial S and W before a consonant, as in pay-marf for sperma. Syllable final L, M, N, R, S, adaruko for anthracose. In the first example, the pay, which was primarily used as its value pay of grid class CV, is being used for spur, not in that class. This was not an innovative or exceptional use, but followed the stated rules. Similarly, A, being primarily of grid class V, is being used as an and could be used for al, am, r, and so on. Clusters of 2 or 3 consonants that do not follow the initial S and W rule or the double consonants, I 3/4, I and cus were represented by the same number of signs of type CV as the cluster had consonants, Knossos for Knossos, Kuruso for Krusos. The consonants were the same as in the cluster. The vowels so introduced have been called empty, null, extra, dead, and other terms by various writers as they represent no sound. The sign was not alphabetic, rules governed the selection of the vowel and therefore of the sign. The vowel had to be the same as the one of the first syllable following the cluster, or if at the end of the word, preceding, t repo with t to match re. Ideograms. Linear B also uses a large number of ideograms. They express the type of object concerned, a unit of measure. They are typically at the end of a line before a number and appear to signify the object the number applies to. Many of the values remain unknown or disputed. Some commodities such as cloth and containers are divided into many different categories represented by distinct ideograms. Livestock may be marked with respect to their sex. The numerical references for the ideograms were originally devised by Ventris and Bennett, divided into functional groups corresponding to the breakdown of Bennett's index. These groups are numbered beginning 100, 110, 120 etc., with some provision of spare numbers for future additions. The official CIPEM numberings used today are based on Ventris and Bennett's numbering, with the provision that 3 or 4 letter codes, based on Latin words that seemed relevant at the time, are used where the meanings are known and agreed. Unicode encodes 123 linear B ideograms. The ideograms are symbols, not pictures of the objects in question. For example, one tablet records a tripod with missing legs, but the ideogram used is of a tripod with 3 legs. In modern transcriptions of linear B tablets, it is typically convenient to represent an ideogram by its Latin or English name or by an abbreviation of the Latin name. Ventris and Chadwick generally used English. Bennett, Latin. Neither the English nor the Latin can be relied upon as an accurate name of the object. In fact, the identification of some of the more obscure objects is a matter of exegesis. Archives, corpus, inscriptions in Linear B have been found on tablets and vases or other objects. They are catalogued and classified by, inter alia, the location of the excavation they were found in. Another 170 inscriptions in Linear B have been found on various vessels, for a total of some 6,058 known inscriptions. If it is genuine, the Kafkania pebble, dated to the 17th century BC, would be the oldest known Mycenaean inscription, and hence the earliest preserved testimony of the Greek language. Besides that, an inscribed clay tablet was found in Iklina dating to between 1450 and 1350 BC. Linear B tablets have also been found as far as Bernstorff, in Germany. Chronology. Timeline of Bronze Age Eastern Mediterranean scripts, the sequence and the geographical spread of Cretan hieroglyphs, Linear A, and Linear B, the 3 overlapping, but distinct, writing systems on Bronze Age Crete, the Aegean Islands, and the Greek mainland are summarized as follows. Timeline of Linear B. The main archives for Linear B are associated with these stages of late Minoan and Helladic pottery. Controversy on the date of the Knossos tablets. The Knossos archive was dated by Arthur Evans to the destruction by conflagration of about 1400 BC, which would have baked and preserved the clay tablets. He dated this event to the LM2 period. This view stood until Carl Blegen excavated the site of ancient Pylos in 1939 and uncovered tablets inscribed in Linear B. They were fired in the conflagration that destroyed Pylos about 1200 BC, at the end of Lialib. With the decipherment of Linear B by Michael Ventris in 1952, serious questions about Evans' date began to be considered. Most notably, Blegen said that the inscribed stirrup jars, which are oil flasks with stirrup-shaped handles, imported from Crete around 1200 were of the same type as those dated by Evans to the destruction of 1400. Blegen found a number of similarities between 1200 BC Pylos and 1400 BC Knossos and suggested the Knossian evidence be re-examined, as he was sure of the 1200 Pylian date. The examination uncovered a number of difficulties. The Knossos tablets had been found at various locations in the palace. Evans had not kept exact records. Recourse was had to the day books of Evans' assistant, Duncan Mackenzie, who had conducted the day-to-day excavations. There were discrepancies between the notes in the day books and Evans' excavation reports. Moreover, the two men had disagreed over the location and strata of the tablets. The results of the reinvestigation were eventually published by Palmer and Boardman, Ontario, the Knossos tablets. It contains two works, Leonard Robert Palmer's The Fine Places of the Knossos tablets and John Boardman's The Date of the Knossos tablets, representing Blejans and Evans' views respectively. Consequently, the dispute was known for a time as the Palmer-Boardman dispute. There has been no generally accepted resolution to it yet. Contents: the major cities and palaces used linear B for records of disbursements of goods. Wool, sheep, and grain were some common items, often given to groups of religious people and to groups of men watching the coastline. The tablets were kept in groups in baskets on shelves, judging by impressions left in the clay from the weaving of the baskets. When the buildings they were housed in were destroyed by fires, many of the tablets were fired. Discovery and decipherment. Arthur J. Evans' classification of scripts, the British archaeologist Arthur Evans, keeper of the Ashmolean Museum, was presented by Greville Chester in 1886 with a seal stone from Crete engraved with a writing he took to be Mycenaean. Heinrich Schliemann had encountered signs similar to these, but had never identified the signs clearly as writing, relating in his major work on Mycenae that of combinations of signs resembling inscriptions I have hitherto only found 3 or 4. In 1893 Evans purchased more seal stones while shopping in Athens. He verified from the antiquarian dealers that the stones come from Crete. During the next year he noticed the script on other artifacts in the Ashmolean. In 1894, he embarked for Crete in search of the script. Almost immediately on arrival, he jumped into a trench at Knossos and saw the sign of the double axe on a palace wall. He knew he had found the source of the script. Subsequently he found more stones being worn by Cretan women as amulets. They were called I cubed I plus or minus I or I euro I micron I micron I and had come from the various ruins. Starting in 1894, Evans published his theories that the signs evidenced various phases in the development of a writing system in the Journal of Hellenic Studies, the first article being Primitive Pictographs and a Pre-Phoenician Script from Crete. In these articles Evans distinguished between pictographic writing, and a linear system of writing. He did not explicitly define these terms, causing some confusion among subsequent writers concerning what he meant, but in 1898 he wrote these linear forms indeed consist of simple geometrical figures which unlike the more complicated pictorial class were little susceptible to modification, and that the linear or quasi-alphabetic signs were in the main ultimately derived from the rudely scratched line pictures belonging to the infancy of art can hardly be doubted. Meanwhile Evans began to negotiate for the purchase of Knossos. He established a special fund, the Cretan Exploration Fund, containing only his own money at first. By 1896, the fund had purchased 1/4 of Kefala Hill, on which the ruins were located, with first option to buy the rest. However, he could not obtain a firman, or permission to excavate, from the Ottoman government. He returned to Britain. In January 1897, the Christian population of Crete staged its final insurrection against the Ottoman Empire. The last Ottoman troops were ferried off the island by the British fleet on December 5, 1898. In that year also, Evans and his friends returned to finish paying for the site. By this time, the fund had other contributors as well. In 1899, the constitution of a new Cretan republic went into effect. Once Arthur had received permission to excavate from the local authorities, excavation on the hill began on March 23, 1900. According to Evans' report to the British School at Athens for that year, on April 5, the excavators discovered the first large cache ever of linear B tablets among the remains of a wooden box in a disused terracotta bathtub. Subsequently, caches turned up at multiple locations, including the room of the chariot tablets, where over 350 pieces from 4 boxes were found. The tablets were 4.5 cm to 19.5 cm long by 1.2 cm to 7.2 cm wide and were scored with horizontal lines over which text was written in about 70 characters. Even in this earliest excavation report, Evans could tell that a certain number of quasi-pictorial characters also occur which seem to have an ideographic or determinative meaning. The excavation was over for that year by June 2. Evans reported, only a comparatively small proportion of the tablets were preserved in their entirety, the causes of destruction being rainfall through the roof of the storage room, crumbling of small pieces, and being thrown away by workmen who failed to identify them. A report on September 6 to the Royal Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland began to use some of the concepts characteristic of Evans' later thought, Palace of Knossos, and Palace of Minos. Appleton's for that year, 1900, notes that Evans took up Stillman's theme that the palace was the labyrinth of mythology in which the half-bovine son of King Minos lurked. In the report, the tablets are now called a linear script as opposed to the hieroglyphic or conventionalized pictographic script. The linear script is characters that are of a free, upright, European character, and seem to have been for the most part syllabic. Evans reasserts the ideographic idea, a certain number are unquestionably ideographic or determinative. The years after 1900 were consumed by excavations at Knossos and the discovery and study by Evans of tablets there and elsewhere, but nothing substantially new occurred. Evans planned a comprehensive work on Cretan scripts to be called Scripta Manu. A year before the publication of Volume I, he began to drop hints that he now believed the linear script was two scripts, to be presented in the forthcoming book. In Scripta Manu I, which appeared in 1909, he explained that the discovery of the Phaistos disc in July 1908, had caused him to pull the book from the presses so that he could include the disc by permission, as it had not yet been published. On the next page he mentioned that he was also including by permission of Federico Halbherr of the Italian mission in Crete unpublished tablets from Hagia Triada written in a linear script of Class A. To what degree if any Halbherr was responsible for Evans' division of the linear script into Class A and Class B is not stated. The Knossos tablets were of Class B, so that Evans could have perceived Class A only in tablets from elsewhere, and so recently that he needed permission to include the examples. Evans summarized the differences between the two scripts as type, or form of script. That is, varieties in the formation and arrangement of the characters. For example, he says the clade documents belonging to Class A show a certain approximation in their forms to those presenting the hieroglyphic inscriptions. The system of numerals is also in some respects intermediate between that of the hieroglyphic documents and that of the linear Class B. The first volume covered the hieroglyphic and primitive linear classes in three parts, the pre-Phoenician scripts of Crete, the pictorial script, and the Phaistos disc. One or two more volumes publishing the Linear A and Linear B tablets were planned, but Evans ran out of time. The project required more than one man could bring to it. For a good many of the years left to him, he was deeply enmeshed in war and politics in the Balkans. When he did return to Knossos, completion and publication of the palace excavations took priority. His greatest work, Palace of Minos, came out in 1935. It did include scattered descriptions of tablets. His life was over in 1941, during additional turmoil in the eastern Mediterranean. The Knossos tablets had remained in the museum at Iraklouan, Crete, where many of them now were missing. The unpublished second volume consisted of notes by Evans and plates and fonts created by Clarendon Press. In 1939, Carl Blegen had uncovered the Pylos tablets. Pressure was mounting to finish Scripta Manu II. After Evans' death, Alice Kobewa, assistant to John Myers and major transcriber of the Knossos tablets, prompted Myers to come back from retirement and finish the work. E. L. Bennett added more transcriptions. The second volume came out in 1952 with Evans cited as author and Myers as editor, just before the discovery that Linear B writes an early form of Greek. An impatient Ventris and Chadwick declared, 2 generations of scholars had been cheated of the opportunity to work constructively on the problem. Alice Kobewa's triplets, about the same time, Alice Kobewa studied Linear B and managed to construct grids, linking symbols that seemed to have a strong grammatical relationship. Kobewa noticed that a number of Linear B words had common roots and suffixes. This led her to believe that Linear B represented an inflected language, with nouns changing their endings depending on their case. However, some characters in the middle of the word seem to correspond with neither a root nor a suffix. Because this effect was found in other known languages, Kobayashi surmised that the odd characters were bridging syllables, with the beginning of the syllable belonging to the root and the end belonging to the suffix. This was a reasonable assumption, since Linear B had far too many characters to be considered alphabetic and far too few characters to be logographic. Therefore, each character should represent a syllable. Using the knowledge that certain characters shared the same beginning or ending sounds, Kobayashi built a table similar to the one above. Before her untimely death at age 43 in 1950, she had discovered the phonetic values for a third of the syllabary. Emmett L. Bennett's transcription conventions, the convention for numbering the symbols still in use today, was first devised by United States Professor Emmett L. Bennett, Jr. working alongside fellow academic Alice Kobayashi. By 1950 Bennett had deciphered the metrical system, based on his intensive study of Linear B tablets unearthed at Pylos. He was also an early proponent of the idea that Linear A and B represented different languages. Bennett's book The Pylos Tablets became a crucial resource for Michael Ventris, who later described it as a wonderful piece of work. Michael Ventris' identification as Greek. Michael Ventris and John Chadwick performed the bulk of their decipherment of Linear B between 1951 and 1953. At first, Ventris chose his own numbering system, and agreed with Evans' hypothesis that Linear B was not Greek. However, he later switched back to Bennett's system. His decipherment, however, would not have been possible without 180,000 cards with notations, created by Kobayashi over several years. While Ventris ultimately made the final connections, Kobayashi's body of work was an integral part of the final solution. Based on Kobayashi's work, and after making some assumptions, Ventris was able to deduce the pronunciation of the syllables. Some Linear B tablets had been discovered on the Greek mainland, and there was reason to believe that some of the chains of symbols he had encountered on the Cretan tablets were names. Noting that certain names appeared only in the Cretan texts, he made the guess that those names applied to cities on the island. This proved to be correct. Armed with the symbols he could decipher from this, Ventris soon unlocked much text and determined that the underlying language of Linear B was in fact Greek, in direct contradiction to the general scientific views of the times, and to Ventris' own hunch that it would turn out to be Etruscan. Ventris' discovery was of some significance, because it demonstrated a Greek-speaking Minoan Mycenaean culture on Crete, and presented Greek in writing some 600 years earlier than what was thought at the time. In 1935, the British School at Athens was celebrating its 50th anniversary with an exhibition at Burlington House, London. Among the speakers was Sir Arthur Evans, then in his 84th year, and the teenager Michael Ventris was present in the audience. John Chadwick, a student of historical Greek, helped Ventris decipher the text and discover the vocabulary and grammar of Mycenaean Greek. Unicode. Linear B was added to the Unicode standard in April 2003 with the release of version 4.0. The Linear B syllabary block is U plus 10,000 a Euro U plus 1007F. The Linear B ideograms block is U plus 10,080 a Euro U plus 100FF. The Unicode block for the related Aegean numbers is U plus 10,100 a Euro U plus 1013F. See also, Aegean civilization, Aegean numerals, Linear A Linear C Proto-Greek, notes. Sources. Bibliography, Carpenter, Rees, Linear B, Phoenix, Volume 11, Number 2, ppA 47 a Euro 62, Chadwick, John. The Decipherment of Linear B 2nd edition. Cambridge UP. ISBN A0-521-39830-4, Chadwick, John. The Mycenaean World. Cambridge UP. ISBN A0-521-29037-6, Chadwick, John. Linear B and Related Scripts. Reading the Past. Third Impression. University of California Press British Museum. ISBN A0-520-06019-9 has the Nkomi clay tablet, circa 1500 BCE, examples of Linear B tablets, and translated, the basic Linear B syllabary, the Cypriot syllabary and discussions thereof, and short sections on Linear A, and the Phaistos disc. Fox, Margaret. The Riddle of the Labyrinth, The Quest to Crack an Ancient Code. Echo. ISBN A978-0062228833. Levin, Saul. The Linear B Decipherment Controversy Re-Examined. State University of New York Press. OCLCA 288842. McDorman, Richard E. Language and the Ancient Greeks and on the Decipherment of Linear B. ISBN A978-0-9839112-3-4. Palema, Thomas G., Unlocking the Secrets of Ancient Writing, The Parallel Lives of Michael Ventris and Linda Skeel and the Decipherment of Mycenaean and Mayan Writing, University of Texas at Austin, 11th International Mycenological Colloquium, 2000. Robinson, Andrew. The Story of Writing. Paperback edition. Thames and Hudson. ISBN A0-500-28156-4. Chapter 6, Linear B, pages 108-119, discusses Arthur Evans, his work, The Cypriot Clues, The Syllabary, Alice Kobewa, The Grid, and a sample tablet transliterated, and translated into English. Singh, Simon. The Code Book. Anchor. ISBN A0-385-49532-3. For a general outline of the Linear B deciphering story, From Schliemann to Chadwick. Ventris, Michael. Work Notes on Minoan Language Research and Other Unedited Papers. Edizioni dello Ateneo 1988. Roma, Ventris, Michael. Chadwick, John. Documents in Mycenaean Greek. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press. ISBN A0-521-08558-6. Ventris, Michael. Chadwick, John. Evidence for Greek Dialect in the Mycenaean Archives, The Journal of Hellenic Studies, Volume 73 ppA 84-103. External links, Ager, Simon. Linear B. Omniglet. Retrieved January 6, 2009. Clark, Curtis. True Type Fonts, Ancient Alphabets and Mythic Symbols, Linear B. Curtis Clark. Aurora, Federico. Hug, Dag Trigv Da Euro MOS, Database of Mycenaean at Oslo AL. University of Oslo. Fox, Margaret. Alice E. Kobewa, 43. Lost to History No More. New York Times. Retrieved May 13, 2013. Givlers, Marcos. Mycenaean, English Dictionary Expercrete.com. Retrieved January 11, 2009. Linear B at DMOZ, Lowe, Lawrence. Linear B. AncientScripts.com. Retrieved January 5, 2009. Macready, David. Weiss, Mimi. Gallery of Unicode Fonts, Linear B Syllabary. WAZU, Japan. Retrieved January 11, 2009. Owens, Dr. Gareth. Daedalica, Scripts and Languages of Minoan and Mycenaean Crete. Technological Educational Institute of Crete. Retrieved January 9, 2009. A. Paleo Lexicon Word Study Tool of Ancient Languages, including Linear B. Paleolexicon.com. Palema, Thomas G., A Linear B Tablet from Heidelberg, Università. Copyright Elia G.E., Palema, Thomas G. Elizabeth I. Pope. F. Kent Riley III. The Parallel Lives of Michael Ventris and Linda Skeel and the Decipherment of Mycenaean and Mayan Writing. Austin, University of Texas. ISBN A0-9649410-4X. ISBN 0964941004X. Retrieved January 13, 2009. Palmer, Dr. Michael M. The Linear B Syllabary. Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Greek-language.com. Raymer, K. A Linear B Transliterations. Minoan Linear A and Mycenaean Linear B Mediterranean A. Rutter, Jeremy B. The Prehistoric Archaeology of the Aegean. Hanover, New Hampshire, The Foundation of the Hellenic World, Dartmouth College. Retrieved January 5, 2009. A.